Welcome UPSC aspirants to this high-yield explainer. Today, we're dissecting a landmark Supreme Court judgment that's an absolute must-know for your General Studies Paper 2 preparation. We're talking social justice and vulnerable sections. Let's dive directly into this critical intersection of human trafficking, migration, and the legal friction between the ITPA and our new criminal laws. To really ground this discussion, let's start with a foundational observation straight from the bench. Justice Bharatiya noted, and I quote, "For a large majority of this country's population, migration is a survival and livelihood strategy. Trafficking cannot be separated from broader migration flows." Aspirants, you really need to internalize how this connects the socio-economic realities of our most vulnerable populations directly to your syllabus. Trafficking doesn't just happen in a vacuum, right? It emerges directly from within these massive migration flows.
The court unpacks these systemic inequalities brilliantly. While it's absolutely crucial to state that not all migration is trafficking, they observe that trafficking rarely occurs without migration. Think about it. A simple journey in search of a dignified livelihood often descends into a nightmare pathway of exploitation, mostly for women and even children. Please, note this structural vulnerability down. Incorporating this exact concept will make for an exceptionally strong and mature introduction in your mains answers.
Building on that structural vulnerability, the Supreme Court delivered a sharp, uncompromising critique of the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, or ITPA. Let's break down these legislative flaws because they are absolutely crucial for your analysis. First, the statute completely fails to accord rights to voluntary adult sex workers. Its very silence amplifies deep social stigma, leading to extreme isolation. Furthermore, it conflates sex trafficking with voluntary sex work. Shockingly, the court highlighted that the act tends to harass the very victims it was meant to protect, and it doesn't even expressly exclude children from its ambit. You need to understand exactly why the Supreme Court found this statute fundamentally lacking in providing true protections.
And that brings us to a highly quotable distinction made by the bench. The Supreme Court calls for a meaningful starting point here, recognizing the rights of voluntary adult sex workers. Justice Bharatiya observed that the rights of sex workers can exist without there being a right to sex work. Aspirants, this is absolute gold for your essays. Weaving this exact phrase into your answers demonstrates a highly nuanced understanding of constitutional protections versus specific vocational rights. Now get your pens ready because this comparative analysis is the ultimate differentiator for your exam. Looking at the new legal framework, Section 143 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita strictly requires the Palermo Protocol's three-tiered framework. That means the act, the specified means, such as force, coercion, deception, or inducement, and the purpose, to legally constitute trafficking. But shifting our focus to the ITPA, it operates on a completely different logic. It basically treats all prostitution involving third parties as commercial sexual exploitation, completely regardless of whether any force or coercion was actually employed.
This brilliantly illustrates the core legal crux of the judgment. Because Section 143 of the BNS mandates specific means for an act to amount to trafficking, it draws a clear, necessary legal line. The legislature absolutely must re-examine this conflation in our broader legal framework. Because the ITPA fails to require these specific means, it relies on a blanket criminalization approach. And what happens? It ultimately ends up harassing the marginalized victims it should be actively protecting.
To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a challenging mock question to practice right away. Analyze the need to separate human trafficking from broader migration flows and voluntary sex work in India's legislative framework. Take the synthesis we've discussed today, the socioeconomic realities of migration, the stark critique of the ITPA, and the much-needed nuance provided by the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, and use it to structure your answer. You have the conceptual clarity, now apply it. Ask yourself, how can the state protect the vulnerable without criminalizing their mere struggle to survive? Keep practicing this level of critical analysis, keep studying hard, and best of luck, aspirants.